Good evening and welcome. Tonight I'm going to be reading to you from this book called Lessons from Our Ancestors. This is part of Viewer's Choice 2024, where you guys got to pick the topics to read about at the end of the year. And this was chosen by Krista, who wanted something about ancient cultures. And this is a really good book about that. It's mostly about archaeology and how we know all of these things about our ancestors, but I'm just going to read to you the pages about how our ancestors once lived and what we could learn from them. This video is also going to be mixed, soft spoken, and whispered. So let me know if you guys enjoy that. Let's get into it. This is by Raksha Dave, who's an archaeologist. You can see her right there. First, we are starting off with Australia's first peoples were conservationists. And of course, we're in Australia around 40,000 BCE. Australia is home to the oldest continuous culture on Earth, a culture which protects and preserves the environment. Over 40,000 years ago, the first peoples of Australia sailed across the ocean from Asia to settle in Australia. At a time when most of the world was locked in ice, the ancestors of the Pakianti, Muddy Muddy, and Nyamper thrived. All three groups came together at Lake Mungo and the Willandra Lakes region, and just as the land looked after them, they in turn cared for the land. This is still the case today as the Pakianti, Muddy Muddy, and Nyamper people continue their close connections to the land at Lake Mungo, and the fact that their cultures have thrived for so long is a testament to their sustainability. The ancestors of the Pakianti, Muddy Muddy, and Nyamper were caretakers of the environment. They protected their land, respected wildlife, and made use of knowledge passed down through the generations. Fire pits were dug with digging sticks and were made for the same reasons that people use them today, to cook food and keep warm. They were built in a variety of ways. Dome-shaped tents known as gunyas were built from sticks, bark, and sometimes leaves. They were cleverly dotted along the lake's shoreline to be in the best positions to gather food. Indigenous Australians left behind the oldest footprints ever found in Australia. Tracks tell amazing stories, like the fact that foragers included all members of a group, women, men, and even children. Although they were limited to foods occurring naturally in their area, the ancestors of the Pakianti, Muddy Muddy, and Nyamper knew exactly when, where, and how to find everything edible. They hunted for fish like perch and Murray cod using handheld nets made of woven plant fibers. Our next chapter is Women and Children Painted, the Chauvet Cave, and this is around 35,000 BCE in France. One of the oldest artwork in history was created by women and children. More than 30,000 years ago, a group of nomadic people called the Aurignacians traveled for miles, following migrating herds for food. They were hunters, but they were also artists. They created paintings on the walls of Chauvet Cave, drawing animals from horses to woolly mammoths. It was thought that their art commemorated their kills, which is why historians assumed that the artist must have been male, because they believed only men were hunter-gatherers, Actually, most of the art created in Europe at this time was crafted by women and children, making them the true artists of some of the earliest masterpieces in the world. Women and children used two main colors to create their cave art, red and black. These colors were natural materials known as pigments. Wood from Scots pines, which is a species of tree, was burned to create a soft black charred lump known as charcoal to create a prehistoric pencil. Alongside their artistic work, Orgnosian women were big game hunters. Hunting was important for survival, and so participation from everyone in the group made good evolutionary sense for many hunter-gatherer groups. Hand art was made by placing a palm covered with pigment on the wall, or by putting a hand against the wall and blowing pigment around it to form a stencil. Artists learned to make small, sharp tools from stone, antler, bone, or wood. These tools were used to create incisions on hard limestone walls. Our next chapter, gender equality blossomed at Çatalhöyük. This is around 7,400, I was right. 7,400 to 6,500 BCE in Turkey. There were equal rights for men and women in the ancient city of Çatalhöyük. You may think that gender equality is a modern concept, but around 9,000 years ago, groups of Neolithic and Chalcolithic hunter-gatherers abandoned their nomadic lives and collectively built a society in Çatalhöyük, where men and women held the same status. There weren't any elite ruling groups, like kings, queens, or chiefs, nor any divisions based on gender. Day-to-day tasks, from farming to baking, were shared among different households and completed together cooperatively. Life continued at Çatalhöyük for 1,400 years, and it became the most populated, organized, and settled city from the Neolithic and Chalcolithic periods. Rectangular mud brick houses were similar in size and layout, showing an early type of urban design based on community and equality. Families built them close together and climbed over roofs to access rooms from above. Men and women carried out the same jobs and spent the same amount of time indoors and outdoors, from tending to animals and making tools to baking and running households. Kernstones, which is an ancient device for grinding grains like corn, and cooking pots were expensive to obtain and so were shared equally between households. Children observed adults at work, learning how to perform rituals, create pieces of art, build houses, and harvest food. The next chapter is Mohenjo-Daro was a sustainable city. This is around 2500 to 1900 BCE in Pakistan. Mohenjo-Daro was more sustainable than most cities today. Imagine a sustainable city planned entirely with the well-being of its citizens in mind, where residents are cooled by air carefully designed to flow through its streets by day and are warmed by heat-retaining buildings by night, where citizens drink crystal-clear rainwater and use waste to fertilize the crops, feeding its population year-round with organic produce. It sounds like something from the future, doesn't it? In fact, this is the ancient city Mohenjo-Daro, nestled on the fertile banks of the Indus River. It was built by the Harappan civilization, also known as the Indus Valley Civilization, around 4,500 years ago. Housing 40,000 people, Mohenjo-daro was equal in size to many well-known cities at the time. But unlike the societies of ancient Greece and Egypt, Mohenjo-daro was unique. It was self-sufficient in every way. The people of Mohenjo-daro were skilled at living off the land. Jewelry made from unearthed seashells, pearls, and beads were bought and sold at the thriving marketplace. During monsoon season, rainwater filled the 700 wells built around the city. It was collected and saved, so everyone had access to water even during dry spells. Houses had thick walls made of kiln-fired bricks. The light color of the bricks reflected the heat from the sun, and the heat from the air was absorbed by the mass of the walls, keeping homes cool during the day and warm during the night. The city had a brilliant underground sewage system that carried polluted water and waste out of homes straight to farmers who used it as fertilizer to help their crops grow. Mohenjo-daro was the first known city to be constructed on a grid plan, which meant streets ran at right angles to one another. This had social and economic benefits, allowing for more cultural exchanges and equality through shared blocks. The next chapter is called Women Warriors Thrived in Ancient China. This is around 1600 to 1046 BCE, and of course we're in China. Yanshu was home to the greatest military leader of the Shang dynasty, Fu Hao. Over 3,500 years ago, ancient China was ruled by a powerful family of kings. This period was known as the Shang dynasty. A Shang monarch would rely on an army to protect their kingdom, and Fu Hao was an army general. She commanded 13,000 loyal soldiers, many of whom were women too. She even overcame the mighty Tu Fang, an army that fought against the Shang for generations, until it was finally defeated by Fu Hao and her army in a single battle. As time went on, the balance of power between men and women shifted, and Fu Hao's success descended into myth, with many historians unable to believe that a female military leader could ever have existed. Oracle bones were used by army generals to seek advice on military strategy. Script was etched onto animal bones, which were then heated until cracks appeared. Shang priests would then interpret the cracks and make predictions based on what they saw. Fu Hao's army was equipped with an assortment of bronze weaponry, including spears, bows, helmets, and yues, which are battle axes. A battle axe could slice a person in half with a single blow. Alongside her military roles, Fu Hao became an active politician and influential leader. Both were unusual roles for women at the time. Wooden boxes containing cowrie shells were seized from conquered lands. Used as a form of currency, cowries were given out to military leaders as rewards after successful battles. Next chapter. Black Pharaohs ruled ancient Egypt. This is in 747 to 656 BCE in Sudan. The Black Pharaohs were an ancient superpower that dominated the Nile Valley and rivaled the Egyptians. The kings of the Kush Empire, also known as the Black Pharaohs, ruled Egypt for 100 years. Taharka was the most powerful emperor of the ancient world. He ruled for 26 years, and his land was rich in gold. During his reign, Taharka restored existing pyramids and built new ones, and for almost 3,000 years, these pyramids were the only clues left of the mighty Kush kingdom. The Black Pharaohs' reign became legendary among African people, but was written off as hearsay by some racist historians who thought the Kush people couldn't build pyramids worthy of the same attention and respect as the Egyptians. Kushite men and women were fierce warriors, known for their skills with bows and arrows. Archers formed the core of Kush armies, prompting the ancient Egyptians to name Kush Taseti, meaning land of the bow. Kush queens were seen as equals to pharaohs and often held important religious and political roles. Around 255 Kush pyramids were built, compared with about 118 Egyptian ones. The Kush pyramids were erected using shadoofs, which are wooden counterweight cranes, and a kind of mathematics called trigonometry. When he became pharaoh, Taharqa vowed to build pyramids, places where statues dedicated to important gods lived. He hoped these statues would provide him with help in ruling over such a large kingdom. The kingdom of Kush's gold and ivory were prized throughout the Mediterranean and the Middle East, and sales of precious items such as animal skins and ostrich feathers flourished under Taharqa's reign. Next chapter. Women triumphed at the ancient Olympic Games. This is in 396 BCE, and of course in Greece. Kaniska, which I hope that's how you say her name, Kaniska, was the first woman to compete in the male-only ancient Olympic Games, and she won. The Olympics that we see on television today have their origins in ancient Greece, beginning almost 3,000 years ago in Olympia. Every 4 years, men and boys entered competitions, like the 4-horse chariot race, but women and girls were not allowed to participate. However, they could train horses, and in the chariot race, the trainers were also seen as winners, a loophole that Kaniska took advantage of. She coached a driver to victory, earning the first wreath ever bestowed on a woman. The fact that Kaniska didn't physically compete has led history to overlook her achievement, but her success inspired many women at the time who went on to attain similar greatness. As the rules banned women from physically attending the Olympics, nobody knows for sure whether Kaniska saw her horses win, although she may have been spectating in the crowd chaperoned by her brother. Fast messengers carried word of an Olympic victory to the winner's home city, where celebratory preparations began at once, and news that a woman had won would have spread very quickly indeed. Winning drivers received woolen bands to tie around their head. Trainers were crowned with olive wreaths made from the leaves of a sacred tree, and were sometimes given jars of olive oil, which was an extravagant prize at the time. The 4-horse chariot raced 12 times around a track, measuring about 8 miles in total. It was a popular sport in ancient Greece, appealing to all social classes. Our next chapter. Asoka was a great and compassionate king. This is around 268 to 232 BCE in India. Emperor Asoka preached messages of tolerance and compassion throughout his kingdom. Taking a stroll through the ancient walkways of Sarnath, it may have dawned on you that this was a unique city. Public messages of inclusivity were placed prominently. Clean water was freely available, and crops were grown to provide food for everyone. Hospitals offered care to all citizens, no matter their creed or status. The welfare of animals was promoted throughout the land. Looking after the city and the rest of the Mauryan Empire was a man considered to be one of the greatest Indian emperors of all time, Ashoka. His rule was influenced by his Buddhist faith, a new religion and philosophy founded by Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, which saw Ashoka embark upon a pilgrimage across India to promote peace. Ashoka performed many acts of social welfare during his pilgrimage. He established large hospitals and built fresh water wells. He even banned war, explaining there would only be conquest by Dharma, a Buddhist moral code for the right life. Dams were constructed to ensure steady sources of clean water reached towns and villages across India. Water channels were diverted to fields so that enough crops were grown to provide food for all residents. Hospitals were built for humans and animals, and care was available to everyone for free. Medicines were made using plants with healing properties, which were grown nearby. Stone pillars were erected across the Mauryan Empire, located in public places so everyone had access to them. Inscriptions called edicts were carved on them and also on rocks to remind people to embrace peaceful lives. You can see the lions at the top there. Our next chapter. Ancient Maka lived in harmony with nature. This is around 200 CE in the USA. The Maka are known as people of the sea and forest. More than 2,000 years ago, the Maka could be found along the Pacific Northwest coast of the modern United States, living in harmony with nature. Ozette was the largest of 5 main Maka villages, and there lived, forgive me because I'm most likely going to mispronounce this, Quitichchaakts, or people who live by the rocks and seagulls. This was their name because their livelihood came from the nature that surrounded their home. Canoes were made from forest materials like red cedar wood, and food was found in the water. The Maka were creative about how to use different natural resources and embraced this knowledge in their everyday life. And although a mudslide engulfed several longhouses at Ozette around 500 years ago, the Maka continued life in their traditional territory and still remain connected with the natural world today. Much of what is known about the ancient Maka's natural living is derived from their oral tradition. Songs and dances were important ways for the Maka to communicate. Ancient Maka were skilled woodworkers and created ceremonial masks from western red cedar, alder, yew, and spruce. The carvings tell stories that have been passed down. Using natural resources from the forest, the Maka built canoes which took to the water in the hunt for whales, seals, and fish. Back on land, elders had the responsibility of teaching the rest of the group how to use many parts of each animal to minimize waste. Ancient Maka respected the plants that sustained them. Stories were told about the great western red cedar trees that provided materials for houses and canoes, as well as the trees, plants, and grasses that supplied fibers for baskets and clothes. Our next chapter. Indigenous peoples lived in cosmopolitan cities. This is around 700 to 1350 CE, also in the USA. The Mississippians thrived in the vibrant city of Cahokia. Cahokia was a major city that existed near what is now St. Louis, Missouri, and it was home to one of the most advanced civilizations in ancient North America, the Mississippians. If you took a stroll through it, you would have discovered over 100 impressive earthen mounds with open plazas and thousands of houses, temples, and public buildings, all organized into complex districts. When this marvel of engineering was confirmed as human-made, its history was bypassed in favor of the idea that indigenous peoples were only capable of living in small tribal communities. Yet at its height, Cahokia rivaled the size of cities like medieval London and Paris. To the west of Monk's Mound, painted red posts were placed in a circle and used to mark solstices, which are the longest and shortest days, and equinoxes, which is when day and night are of equal length. Cahokia was laid out in a specific plan, and in the center stood what is now known as Monk's Mound. At 100 feet tall, it was the largest example of an earthen mound in North America, and was thought to be where Cahokia's political and spiritual leaders met. The grand plaza was often cleared so that people could play a game with stones and spears called chunky. Chunky was designed to unite the city's people and was so popular that visitors would come to Cahokia to watch competitors play. Contrary to the perception of indigenous peoples living a nomadic existence, at its peak, Cahokia was home to up to 20,000 citizens. Like city dwellers in other parts of the world, the Mississippians enjoyed a party. Festivals at Cahokia were mostly centered around great feasts. And our next chapter, the Vikings were also peaceful traders. This is around 960 CE in Germany. Hedeby was a thriving Viking port town that welcomed traders from around the world. Ask someone to describe the Vikings, and chances are they will talk about white people with blonde hair who pillaged as their only way of living. But at Hedeby, we discover a hidden history. Vikings were actually multicultural, and their towns were filled with skilled craftspeople and resourceful traders. For the Vikings who left their homeland and took to the sea, many settled peacefully in new places. They shared technology, swapped ideas, and often lived side by side in harmony with their contemporaries. This was the case some 1,000 years ago at a small town known as Hedeby. As a small town known as Hedeby became an important Viking trading center, home to a melting pot of diverse ideas and cultures. A steady supply of raw materials encouraged Hedeby to establish workshops in the center of town. Talented Vikings, from blacksmiths to bronze casters, sold and traded their goods at the marketplace. Measuring 130 feet, Viking longships navigated the waters of the world. Powered by wooden oars and strong sails, they carried amber from the Baltics, soapstone from the Shetland Islands, and grain from France. Hedeby was strategically located near trade routes and well connected to the Baltic Sea, so that traders could come and go as they pleased. Silver was the most precious metal of the Viking Age. At Hedeby, the Vikings adopted the use of Islamic silver coins known as dirhams to entice foreign traders to visit their markets, and it worked. Al-Tartushi, a prominent merchant, paid Hedeby a visit and later told the world about it in an extract from his diary. And our next chapter, Great Zimbabwe defied colonial ideology. This is around 1000 to 1590 CE, of course, in Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe was a medieval stone city of astounding prestige built by the Shona people. Today, the city of Great Zimbabwe in southern Africa lies in ruins. But 1,000 years ago, it was a land full of possibilities. Plains of fertile soil to support farming, and mineral resources to provide gold and copper for trading. It was a magnificent place to call home, and for the next 6 centuries, Great Zimbabwe operated as an African superpower, dominating trade and commerce in the medieval world. And yet, its history is defined by decades of disputes about who built it. During the European colonization of Africa, racist historians claimed the ruins couldn't be of African origin, that African people never had the sophistication needed to work gold, trade goods, or build a kingdom. How wrong they were. The Shona are a people whose ancestors built an impressive stone city. Great Zimbabwe was divided into 3 architectural zones: the hill complex, the great enclosure, and the valley. Birds carved from soapstone stood proudly on guard atop the walls and monoliths of the city's columns. These sculptures are unique to Great Zimbabwe and held great spiritual value for the Shona people. At its peak, Great Zimbabwe housed around 10,000 residents, suggesting that the Shona people's longevity was likely based on maintaining good ecological balance between population and available resources. Crafted in expertly worked stone and fitted without the use of mortar, the walls here curved and flowed thanks to the architectural precision of the Shona people. Great Zimbabwe was part of a large trading network. Small purpose-made crucibles were used for melting local gold and copper, which were exchanged for pottery from China, glass beads from Syria, and bronze from Persia. Our next chapter. Ancestors of the Inuit had an equal society. This is around 1200 to 1600 CE in Greenland. In ancient Inuit communities, each person played a crucial role in the survival of the group. Around 700 years ago, the ancestors of present-day Inuit peoples, known as the Thule, successfully inhabited the Arctic. These communities lived in one of the harshest environments known to humankind, and the cold climate demanded that they have the right shelter, clothing, and tools to keep warm, dry, and fed. After all, something as minor as a wet foot could result in frostbite, and perhaps even death. And so cooperation instead of competition was valued. The best person was chosen to perform each specific role, and the responsibilities faced by Thule women were considered equally as important as those taken on by Thule men. Tattoos adorned the faces of Thule women. Each tattoo signified an important accomplishment, from catching a whale to sewing a sealskin parka. A whole community's survival could be dependent on a family member's sewing skills. Overlapping pieces of animal skin were stretched out and sewn together to make waterproof clothes and shoes. Animals were the primary food source, as vegetation rarely grew there. Using tools like toggled harpoons, men and women hunted whales and seals on the water, and caribou and snow foxes on land. The Thule placed a high value in inclusiveness, resourcefulness, and collaboration. All family members were expected to fulfill their roles in society. Everyone also had to play their part in supporting and helping others. And I believe this is the last chapter in our book. Yes, this is the last chapter. It's called Machu Picchu was built on migration. This is around 1450 to 1530 CE in Peru. The story of Machu Picchu is a story of human migration. Around 600 years ago, there was a glorious citadel nestled high in the Andes. Machu Picchu was constructed as a royal estate for Incan emperors, but soon became home to entire communities of skilled workers who moved hundreds of miles to start new lives. They quickly became important members of society, from artisans weaving tunics and farmers managing alpaca herds, to record keepers collecting taxes and engineers designing temples. Their talents were revered by Incan emperors, and they in turn embraced their new lives at Machu Picchu and helped it to prosper for nearly a century. Hailing from the four corners of the vast Inca Empire, around 750 skilled workers moved to Machu Picchu and were collectively known in society as the Yanaguna. Terraced fields were built on mountainsides to allow rainwater to run down the steps and feed crops. This innovative design provided residents with food, from potatoes and tomatoes to quinoa and maize. Earthquakes were common at Machu Picchu, so the Yanaguna constructed buildings with this in mind. Using their forward-thinking masonry skills, they fashioned loose-fitting stones that would bounce during tremors and instead of falling apart, fell back into position. The Yanaguna designed some of Machu Picchu's amazing architecture, from palaces to storage buildings. They recorded their progress on their unique record-keeping system, a quipu. Skilled weavers produced beautiful tunics made from alpaca wool. They were known for crafting the finest cloth across the Inca Empire. Their textiles were more precious than gold or silver. And that is it for our book tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a good